In the name of the living God, Creator, Christ, and Holy Spirit, amen. Let's be seated. This is a story of two spaces, the space inside and the space between. It was 1981, and I was 12 years old. Now, I don't know if you remember being 12, but I got to tell you, I remember it viscerally. And it had to do with these two spaces, the space inside and the space between. When I was 12, the space inside felt confused and unlovable. I knew I believed in God, and my dad's church left me feeling cold, and my mom's meditation group left me feeling lonely. I knew that when I closed the door of my room and turned on the radio and listened to Vin Scully spin tales of Fernando Valenzuela's dancing screwball and double plays that went Russell to Lopes to Garvey, I entered a sanctuary where it was okay to show all the emotions it didn't feel safe to show anywhere else. And I knew that I wanted nothing to do with the preteen jock culture where your real feelings were the last thing you were ever supposed to show. I knew that I didn't belong anywhere. And I didn't know what I found out later, which was so many of the other kids who seemed like they did belong were feeling the same thing, and that like me, they were getting really, really good at hiding it. My space inside was full of all the thoughts, feelings, questions, and confusions of a 12-year-old. The space inside was full. The space between felt empty. I longed to open up my heart and let whoever I was come out, to share all those thoughts and feelings and questions and confusions that filled my space inside, and I was terrified to have anyone find them out. Because the only thing I felt sure of was that the me who was living in that space inside wasn't anywhere near good enough. And so because I was more afraid that someone might reject and hurt me than I was confident that someone might love and embrace me, I kept the space between full of projections of what I thought others thought I should be. I kept the space between full of walls, full of fear. And then my friend Wells invited me to come with him to the Episcopal summer camp up in Prescott, Arizona. Really wanting me to say yes, he gave the only 4-word argument that this 12-year-old heterosexual boy needed to hear. There will be girls. I went. And yes, I did have my first kiss that week, which in all its awkwardness was super cool. But that's not what changed my life that week. What changed my life that week were two people who were willing to share their space inside and what that did to the space between. First was Dave Bailey. Dave is Bishop of Navajo Land now, but back then he was rector of St. Stephen's in Phoenix and the priest running Midler Camp at Chapel Rock. One afternoon I was sitting with him and some other kids, and Dave just started sharing. He started sharing his space inside. Dave started telling his story of addiction and recovery, about how his struggle with alcoholism and about how he battled it still every day. And then he talked about his space between. He talked about the love that he had found that every day helped him get through that struggle, the love he found from God, the love he found in community. Dave talked about the courage he found to face, own, and even to embrace who he was in that space inside when the space between is filled with love. Love that stays, love that transforms, love that heals. The second was a girl named Lisa. Now, Lisa was a year older than me and went to my school. She was smart and funny and popular. One of those people who seemed like she belonged everywhere she went. One of those people I longed to be and just knew I never would. That night, we were all gathered just before lights out, the whole camp. And unexpectedly, Lisa stepped to the middle of the circle and said she wanted to read a poem that she had written. And a surprised silence descended, and she began. You know, Maya Angelou once said, "I've learned that people will forget what you've said, but people will never forget how you made them feel." I don't remember a single word of the poem Lisa read that night, and I will remember how she made me feel for the rest of my life, because in that 90 seconds of bravery, she opened up her heart and poured out her space inside, and her space inside was as confused and felt as unlovable and uncertain to her as mine did to me. Lisa opened up and let us see her space inside, and it was brave and it was beautiful, not because it was perfect and sure, but because it wasn't, because it was real. And I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, my space inside could be brave and beautiful too. Brené Brown writes that we attribute vulnerability as strength in others and weakness in ourselves. I could not imagine standing in front of all those people and being as vulnerable as Lisa was. I would have felt so weak being honest about my own confusion and uncertainty and unlovability. Hell, it is 38 years later, and I feel kind of weak talking about it now. Isn't it amazing how that works? And that night, I was blown away by Lisa's vulnerability. No, it was actually more than that. I was inspired by Lisa's vulnerability. Lisa's vulnerability began to touch and change and heal something inside me. And I wasn't the only one. As she shared her space inside that night, something happened to the space between. As Lisa read her poem, the space between all of us, a space that could have been filled with judgment, a space that could have been filled with rejection, that space between began to fill with love. And for a moment when she was finished, we just all stood there in silence and in awe, feeling it, feeling the space between us, a space that she had filled with the courage and beauty of her space inside, filled with the transforming, healing power of love, and we were changed. In that moment, even if it was just for a moment, we were all beautiful and we were all brave. In that moment, even if it was just for a moment, a little bit of each of us and all of us was healed. In that moment, even if it was just for a moment, we were one. In that moment, just as I had earlier that day with Dave Bailey, I knew that I was standing on new ground and not feeling lost. I knew I was standing in a place of love without judgment. If I had known enough, I would have taken my shoes off in that moment, because I knew I was standing on the holiest ground I had ever stood. That's the power, the transformative, healing power of vulnerability, of sharing our space inside. I knew that I was standing on the holiest ground I had ever stood because Lisa, in opening herself up, had made that space holy for all of us. And it didn't just feel good that night. It changed my life. Because in that moment, standing on holy ground, I knew I wanted to stay on that ground. And not only that, I wanted to go out there and I wanted to find that ground wherever I could. I wanted to follow anyone who would lead me to that ground. And once I was there, I wanted to reach back and help others find that ground too. I got to tell you, I am hesitant to talk about choosing Jesus. The language of choosing Jesus has been so weaponized to create insiders and outsiders and deceive us with lies that need to die. Lies that we have some inherent stain or unworthiness that only submitting to a condemning, judging God will fix. I am hesitant to talk about choosing Jesus because I know now that in a different gathering, I could have chosen any number of other faiths that celebrate the beauty and power of every space inside and the filling of every space between with the healing power of love. I know now that I was choosing a love that has come and can come in countless particularities of faith and community. And in that moment, I thought, if this is what following Jesus can be about, if following Jesus can be about opening up and being honest about who each of us is and is becoming in the space inside, and then the space between all those spaces being filled to overflowing with love, with non-judgmental, joyful, healing love, if that's what following Jesus can be about, then sign me up. And 38 years later, that is still why I follow Jesus. Not because it is the only place we can find this love. Certainly we find and have found this love on so many paths and in so many places. And I follow Jesus because I have found in incarnation and life, cross and resurrection, the transformative healing power of vulnerability and community gathered with love and justice at the center. Because even as I join others in finding it in many places, I still look at the life and teachings of Jesus and I see whoever you are and wherever you find yourself, you are loved just as you are, with a love that celebrates and transforms, and most of all, a love without judgment that heals. That is why I follow Jesus, and that is why I love Trinity Sunday. Because a God who is Trinity is a God who in each aspect of the divine is fully, unashamedly who they are and who they are becoming in each space inside. A God who is Trinity is a God who is the infinite, non-judgmental, joyful, healing love that fills and overflows all the spaces between those spaces inside. I follow Jesus and I love the poetry of God in Trinity because I am still searching for that new ground of love without judgment where we can stand and know that we are not lost. I am still aspiring to the courage of Dave's vulnerability and Lisa's vulnerability and Jesus' vulnerability because I have seen and felt and been transformed by its healing power. And I follow Jesus in this All Saints community because even though so often we fall short and fall back into fear in our humanity, we also find that new ground, find that healing love with beautiful and transformative regularity. We find it when our young people occupy pulpit and lectern and the circles of Wednesday night youth group and share so courageously their spaces inside and find the spaces between filling with love. We found it a year and a half ago in the chapel as Zelda Kennedy lay dying on the other side of the country. And we find it in countless holy spaces we create each week where we bare hearts and share stories and offer gifts of tears to ourselves and one another and find the spaces between filling with healing, transforming love. We find it as we practice radical inclusion, begging us all not to check our sexual orientation, our theological uncertainties, or our gender, racial, cultural, generational, and other identities at the door. That whoever we are and wherever we find ourselves, we want us all to bring everything in our space inside to this community and lay it together on the heart of our space between, on Christ's table of transforming, healing love. I follow Jesus, and I am a part of this All Saints community because we know what it's like out there. It hasn't changed since I was 12, except it sure feels like it's gotten harder. We are still told to be ashamed of so much of what fills our space inside. We are still told only to show the pieces of ourselves that others will be comfortable with. We are still told that vulnerability is weak and stupid. We are still told that what has happened to us and what we have done is all we are, and that we will be judged without love for every bit of it. We all know what it's like out there. 1 million lying messages a day tell us to fill the space between us with fear of our own unworthiness and anxiety about who has more power, less power, and how we can use the power for ourselves against one another. We all know what it's like out there, and we come together as All Saints Church to say it doesn't have to be this way. Together we can inhabit and discover new ground of love without judgment and know that we are not lost. Together we can be the courage to share our space inside and know that it is brave and it is beautiful, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Together we can know that our vulnerability is our greatest strength, because it frees everyone who comes within earshot of its song to know the healing power of love. Together, we can invite that love into the spaces between that are too easily filled with fear. In so many ways, I am still that 12-year-old boy. I still feel confused and unlovable and uncertain. And now I know that I am not alone. Now I can stand here and tell you that I am becoming a person who believes my space inside is beautiful and brave and good. And that's not just because of Dave and Lisa and Jesus, it's because of you. I know vulnerability is scary. I know in this room we have many histories of our vulnerability being ridiculed and punished and shamed and used against us. I know that we have learned to wall ourselves off, not because we are weak, but because it is a survival skill. And I am standing here to tell you that here, in this space, in this community, at this table, it doesn't have to be this way. Today, 38 years later, I can stand here and tell you that as we trust each other enough to share our spaces inside, no matter what terrible things have happened, when we have tried to share them in the past, the spaces between can be filled with love. And that love will stay, and that love will heal. Each of our lives and our life together is a story of two spaces, the space inside and the space between. I've told you some of my story. What's yours?